You know that one night that quietly slips into your life and destroys everything you thought you understood. The kind of night that doesn't arrive with thunder or warnings, but with a simple knock on the door. Mine was like that. It happened at an hour when nothing unusual was supposed to occur, a time when the world felt predictable. Yet that was the night when a young man, barely in his early 20s, walked into my house holding a pizza box and ended up teaching me something about myself that I had never dared to imagine. I didn't know it then, but that moment would change the entire direction of my marriage, my identity, and my future. And the strangest part, my husband was right there, watching everything unfold from the living room chair as if it were some sort of twisted entertainment. I was 23, freshly married for only 3 months, trying to adapt to a life that people told me would be filled with peace, routine, and stability. But my marriage had already started feeling like a slow suffocation. Marcus was 10 years older than me, and I had convinced myself that maturity would bring security, that age difference meant experience and affection. Instead, I found myself living with a man who barely spoke to me unless he needed something, a man who watched me more like I was a piece of furniture that belonged to him, something he had purchased and placed exactly where he wanted. Every night felt predictable. He came home, dropped into the chair, turned on the TV, and ignored my existence. I cooked, cleaned, pretended everything was fine, and convinced myself that this was what real marriage looked like. Then came that night. I still remember how ordinary I felt as I opened the door. I remember the smell of warm cheese rising from the box and the cool breeze that followed him inside. The delivery boy Elijah was polite at first, smiling, speaking softly, his eyes scanning me in a way that made my heartbeat stumble. It wasn't lust at first sight, it was something more dangerous. It was recognition, as if he sensed something I had been hiding so deeply inside myself that even I had forgotten it existed. When his fingers briefly brushed mine as he handed me the receipt to sign, the spark wasn't subtle, it was a wildfire. Something shifted in the air, something that shouldn't have happened, something that Marcus noticed. Marcus sat across the room, pretending to watch TV, but his eyes were locked on us, cold, sharp, suspicious. He didn't say a word. He didn't blink. He simply observed, like a man analyzing a scene he had not planned but suddenly found extremely interesting. I felt his gaze burning into my back, but Elijah didn't seem bothered. If anything, the energy between us grew heavier. He lingered for a second longer than he needed to, his voice dropping lower as he said, "Enjoy your night." There was a tone in those words, soft, suggestive, dangerous, and Marcus heard it. I knew he heard it. I felt him tense. When I closed the door, the house didn't feel the same. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was pressure, thick enough to crush me. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't ask who the boy was. He didn't comment on the way I hesitated at the door. Instead, he smirked, a slow, unsettling smirk that said he had just witnessed something he intended to use against me, something he intended to twist, to exploit. In that second, I realized I was no longer living with a husband. I was living with a man who enjoyed watching me struggle, watching me react, watching me unravel. And somewhere inside me, something started to crack. I didn't know the boy's name then. I didn't know his story. I didn't know that he would return. Not as a delivery boy, but as a storm that would tear apart the fragile, silent, suffocating world I had been trapped in. All I knew was that the night had shifted the ground beneath my feet. And once a crack appears, it never truly disappears, only spreads. That night was the beginning of the fracture. The night when everything quiet inside me woke up. The night that would eventually destroy the life I thought I wanted, and push me into a truth I never expected to face. Then came that night. I still remember how ordinary I felt as I opened the door. I remember the smell of warm cheese rising from the box and the cool breeze that followed him inside. The delivery boy Elijah was polite at first, smiling, speaking softly, his eyes scanning me in a way that made my heartbeat stumble. It wasn't lust at first sight. It was something more dangerous. It was recognition. As if he sensed something I had been hiding so deeply inside myself that even I had forgotten it existed. When his fingers briefly brushed mine as he handed me the receipt to sign, the spark wasn't subtle, it was a wildfire. Something shifted in the air, something that shouldn't have happened, something that Marcus noticed. Marcus sat across the room, pretending to watch TV, but his eyes were locked on us, cold, sharp, suspicious. He didn't say a word. He didn't blink. He simply observed, like a man analyzing a scene he had not planned but suddenly found extremely interesting. I felt his gaze burning into my back, but Elijah didn't seem bothered. If anything, the energy between us grew heavier. He lingered for a second longer than he needed to, his voice dropping lower as he said, "Enjoy your night." There was a tone in those words, soft, suggestive, dangerous, and Marcus heard it. I knew he heard it. I felt him tense. When I closed the door, the house didn't feel the same. The silence wasn't silence anymore, it was pressure, thick enough to crush me. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't ask who the boy was. He didn't comment on the way I hesitated at the door. Instead, he smirked. A slow, unsettling smirk that said he had just witnessed something he intended to use against me, something he intended to twist, to exploit. In that second, I realized I was no longer living with a husband. I was living with a man who enjoyed watching me struggle, watching me react, watching me unravel. And somewhere, inside me, something started to crack. I didn't know the boy's name then. I didn't know his story. I didn't know that he would return. Not as a delivery boy, but as a storm that would tear apart the fragile, silent, suffocating world I had been trapped in. All I knew was that the night had shifted the ground beneath my feet. And once a crack appears, it never truly disappears, only spreads. That night was the beginning of the fracture. The night when everything quiet inside me woke up. The night that would eventually destroy the life I thought I wanted, and push me into a truth I never expected to face. Adrielle sat in the heavy wooden chair in Theodore Vale's office, her hands trembling in her lap. Outside, the river ran quietly, the soft murmur of water a stark contrast to the storm raging in her mind. She could hardly breathe. Malcolm and Kyra had left the office only moments ago, but the silence they left behind was suffocating. Eamon sat beside her, holding her hand, his presence a calm anchor in a world suddenly turned upside down. He had explained everything, the debts, the forged documents, the false medical notes, the recordings, yet no explanation could soften the blow of betrayal. Her son had plotted against her. The woman she had trusted to care for their family had helped him. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, fragile yet sharp with disbelief. "Why, Malcolm?" she whispered. "Why would he do this to us? To me?" Her gaze sought Eamon's, but even he could offer no easy comfort. His gray eyes, calm and unwavering, reflected both sorrow and relief. Relief that they had survived the trap, sorrow that their own child could plan such harm. Eamon squeezed her hand gently. "Addie, we are safe now. That is what matters." His words were steady, but Adrielle could feel the tension in his arms, the way his muscles braced for the confrontation that had just passed. She felt the weight of months of manipulation, subtle lies, and small, constant acts meant to break her down. The memory of hidden keys, misplaced pills, and forged signatures made her stomach churn. Every smile from Malcolm, every soothing word from Kyra in recent months, now seemed like part of a carefully constructed lie. Theodore cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. "We need to plan carefully from here," he said. "Malcolm and Kyra will try to recover, and they will likely deny everything if confronted without proper documentation. That's why Eamon staged his disappearance. Now, we have undeniable evidence." He spread the folder on the desk again, showing Adrielle the neatly organized records, photographs, and recordings. Each page was a reminder of betrayal, yet also a testament to their survival. "They believed they could control you, and Eamon. They underestimated both of you." Adrielle closed her eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "I can't believe this," she said. "I raised Malcolm, I loved him, and he would have ruined me. My life, everything we built together. How could a son think so little of his own mother?" Her voice was a mixture of despair and fury, raw emotion spilling over. "And she helped him. All those times I invited her into our home, trusted her with my husband's well-being, and she plotted against me." Eamon nodded. "Yes, Addie, that is why I had to disappear. Confronting them directly would have been too dangerous. We needed to wait, gather evidence, and expose the truth at the right moment. Now that we have, we can act decisively, but we also need to prepare for what comes next. Malcolm may try to manipulate the situation even further, and Kyra is unlikely to accept responsibility without a fight." Adrielle's mind raced. She felt a wave of exhaustion, anger, and grief all at once. She had spent her life trying to nurture, to care, to trust. And now that trust had been shattered in a way she could not have imagined. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him," she admitted. "I can't even comprehend how he could be so cold, so calculating." Her voice trembled, but there was also a flicker of determination she had not felt in years. "I can't let him hurt anyone else, not me. Not Eamon, not anyone who comes after us." Theodore nodded approvingly. "That is the right attitude. They were planning fraud, theft, and deceit. The law will take its course, but your emotional recovery is just as important." You and Eamon need to reclaim control of your lives before thinking about forgiveness or reconciliation. Eamon gently took her hand in both of his. Addie, whatever happens, we are together. That is more important than anything else. We survived this, and nothing can take that away from us. Malcolm's actions are his own, and Kyra's are hers. We don't have to carry their guilt or their deception. Adrielle leaned into his chest and closed her eyes. She felt the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders, yet also a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, she felt the possibility of clarity, of safety, of a life not dictated by manipulation and lies. But even as she embraced that possibility, the reality of Malcolm and Kyra's betrayal lingered, gnawing at her mind. They had attempted to poison her trust, her autonomy, her very sense of reality. Hours passed as they reviewed the evidence together. Every document, every photo, every audio clip reinforced the truth of Malcolm and Kyra's plan. Adrielle felt waves of anger rise and fall, but Eamon remained calm, guiding her through the labyrinth of deceit. He explained how Malcolm's gambling debts had grown insurmountable, and how Kyra's falsified nursing credentials had allowed her to access patient records. Information she used to forge documents in Adrielle's name. Each revelation was a dagger, yet also a key to understanding the danger they had narrowly escaped. By evening, Adrielle felt a strange clarity. She could no longer ignore what had happened. She would need to make choices legal, personal, and emotional that would define the rest of her life. She would have to cut ties with Malcolm and Kyra completely. There could be no middle ground, no chance for manipulation, no lingering doubts. Theodore prepared the necessary legal documents to ensure that Malcolm and Kyra could not access any remaining assets. He instructed Adrielle and Eamon on how to navigate the upcoming proceedings, emphasizing the importance of thoroughness. You cannot allow fear, guilt, or love to cloud your judgment, he said. They have already proven how easily they can exploit emotions. You must be decisive, firm, and unwavering. Later, when Adrielle and Eamon returned home, the house felt different. It was quiet, still, but the silence was no longer oppressive. It was a space reclaimed. She walked through each room, touching familiar surfaces, noticing details she had never appreciated before. Every corner, every window, every piece of furniture reminded her of life before manipulation, life that could now be hers again, free from deceit. That night, she lay in bed beside Eamon, her mind a swirl of memories, fears, and cautious hope. I don't know how we'll get through this, she whispered, but I know we have to. I don't recognize Malcolm anymore, and I don't think I ever will. Eamon held her close. We will, he said softly, step by step. We survived this, and that proves our strength. We will rebuild our lives, together. That is the only thing that matters. Adrielle closed her eyes, finally allowing herself a moment of rest. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, emotional confrontations, and the lingering pain of betrayal. But she felt a spark of determination. She would not be broken by her own child's ambition. She would not let Kyra's deceit define her. She would reclaim her life, piece by piece, with Eamon by her side. The next morning, she rose early, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Together, she and Eamon began to plan their next steps carefully. They would confront the financial fraud, secure their assets, and begin the process of legally separating themselves from Malcolm and Kyra. Every detail had to be perfect, every move deliberate. They had survived the worst, but survival was only the beginning. As they left the house that day, heading back to Theodore's office to finalize documents, Adrielle felt something she had not felt in a long time. Control. The storm that Malcolm and Kyra had tried to create in her life had been exposed. The deception had been revealed, and for the first time since her world had begun to crumble, she felt the faint glimmer of freedom. Walking beside Eamon, she realized that the coming days would not be easy, but they would be theirs to navigate. They would face the consequences, take legal action, and finally free themselves from the shadows of those who had sought to destroy them. And in that realization, Adrielle felt a surge of strength, the knowledge that whatever happened next, she and Eamon would face it together, unshakable and unwavering. The following morning, Adrielle awoke with a restless energy she had not felt in months. The sun had barely risen over Maplebridge, spilling pale light across the quiet streets, but her mind was already racing. Every memory of Malcolm and Kyra's betrayal played in her mind like a looped nightmare. The way Malcolm had spoken with venom, how Kyra had smiled when she thought no one was looking, and the meticulous steps they had taken to make Adrielle question her own mind. She had barely slept, yet she felt strangely alert, almost sharpened by the realization that she could no longer afford naivety. Eamon had already risen, his usual calm demeanor tempered with a touch of exhaustion. He had spent the night reviewing the evidence and planning their next steps. When he noticed Adrielle moving around the bedroom, he came over and gently took her hand. "Addie, you need to pace yourself," he said softly. "This is not just about confrontation, it's about reclaiming your life." His words grounded her, even as the storm inside her continued to churn. "I know," Adrielle whispered, "but every time I close my eyes, I see Malcolm's face. His smirk when he thought he could outsmart us. And Kyra, she wasn't even subtle. She played her role perfectly. The caring daughter-in-law, the nurse who loved her patients, but it was all a mask." She paused, squeezing Eamon's hand. "I don't even know who they are anymore." Eamon led her to the kitchen, where they sat at the small oak table, its surface bathed in morning light. "They are not the people you thought they were," he said quietly, "and that's the truth you have to hold on to. The rest will be handled by the law and the evidence we have. But you must take care of yourself." Adrielle nodded, swallowing hard. She felt anger and betrayal coiling in her chest, but beneath it was a deep resolve. She realized she could no longer be passive. She had been patient and trusting her entire life, but now she had proof that trust could be weaponized. She had to act. They began the day by reviewing every detail of Malcolm and Kyra's scheme. Theodore had prepared folders filled with bank statements, credit card records, forged documents, and audio recordings. Each piece of evidence was a painful confirmation of the lengths they had gone to manipulate, deceive, and betray. Adrielle traced her finger across the papers, each line of numbers and signatures like a scar across her history. Her hand trembled, but she refused to let it drop. "They actually tried to erase me," she whispered. "Not just financially, but from my own life." Eamon nodded gravely. "Yes, Addie, but now we can stop them. Now we can ensure that nothing they planned will succeed." Theodore arrived mid-morning, his presence commanding yet reassuring. "We will need to act carefully," he said. "Malcolm and Kyra are both intelligent and dangerous in their own ways. Emotional confrontation will not be enough. We must protect your assets, secure your home, and prepare for the legal battle that will follow." He opened another folder containing emails, photographs of hidden keys, medication, and photographs of financial transactions. "Every detail they tried to hide has been documented. You have everything you need to move forward." Adrielle took a deep breath. She realized, with a mix of horror and relief, that for the first time in months, she held power over the situation. She could choose her next steps, set the boundaries, and take control of her life in a way she hadn't imagined possible. "We can't let them intimidate us anymore," she said firmly. "We've seen the truth. Now we act." By afternoon, they had drafted letters and notifications to freeze accounts, revoke any fraudulent credit cards, and notify the bank and authorities of the fraud. Every move was meticulous. Adrielle was surprised at the clarity of her mind. How methodically she could think through each step despite the emotional turmoil. Eamon stayed close, guiding her, supporting her decisions without taking over. It was a partnership she hadn't fully realized she needed, until now. The confrontation with Malcolm and Kyra loomed over the day like a storm cloud. But Adrielle found herself preparing mentally. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would respond to their lies, their attempts to manipulate her again. She imagined their reactions, how Malcolm's anger might surge, how Kyra's charm might try to deceive her, and with every rehearsal, her resolve strengthened. Late afternoon arrived, and Theodore suggested a controlled meeting with Malcolm and Kyra, one in which the evidence would be presented calmly and legally, leaving no room for manipulation or denial. Adrielle felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She did not want to see them, yet she knew this was necessary. "We have to face them," she admitted, voice trembling, "not for closure, but to stop them from ever hurting anyone again." The meeting took place in a neutral location, a small law office prepared for confrontation. Malcolm and Kyra arrived together, both wearing expressions that masked unease with feigned confidence. Malcolm's eyes flicked nervously to Adrielle as she entered, and Kyra's smile faltered when she realized Theodore and Eamon were present. Adrielle's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stand tall. To meet their eyes without fear, Theodore began by calmly presenting the evidence. He outlined the fraudulent credit cards, the forged signatures, the false medical documents, and the recordings of their conversations plotting against Adrielle and Eamon. He spoke in measured tones, letting the facts speak for themselves. Adrielle watched Malcolm's face blanch, Kyra's fingers tremble, and realized that their carefully constructed masks were cracking. They could not hide from what had been documented. Malcolm tried to interrupt, his voice rising in anger and panic. "This isn't fair. You can't just accuse me. Eamon's calm voice cut through the tension. I heard your words, Malcolm. You planned to erase your mother from her home. You attempted to take what did not belong to you. The evidence is here. Denial is no longer an option. Adrielle felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The son she had raised, the boy she had once nurtured, was now unrecognizable. He was a stranger, a man who had prioritized ambition and greed over family, over love. And yet, seeing him falter, hearing his defenses crumble, she felt the first flicker of closure. Kyra's voice was soft, pleading, please. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Adrielle's own voice, steady now, responded, it went this far because you chose it. You are responsible for your actions, and you will face the consequences. Malcolm's shoulders sagged as he finally realized the extent of his exposure. The anger that had consumed him for months dissolved into shame, frustration, and a dawning comprehension of the harm he had caused. Kyra's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of fear rather than remorse. Adrielle recognized the moment for what it was. The truth could no longer be denied, no matter how much they wished it away. After the meeting, Adrielle and Eamon returned home. The drive was quiet, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows across the streets of Maplebridge. Adrielle gazed out the window, her mind replaying the events of the day. She felt exhausted, drained by the confrontation, yet strangely lighter. The truth had been revealed, the threat had been exposed, and she and Eamon were still together. Once home, they walked through their house, touching familiar surfaces, noticing details that had seemed ordinary before but now felt like markers of reclaimed life. Every corner, every chair, every photo was a reminder of survival. For the first time in months, Adrielle felt a sense of ownership over her life that went beyond the physical house. It was emotional, mental, and deeply personal. She was no longer a passive participant in the world Malcolm and Kyra had tried to control. She was the protagonist of her own story once again. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Adrielle reflected on the day. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had also been empowering. She realized that while the wounds of betrayal would take time to heal, the foundation of her strength had been rebuilt. She could trust herself to make decisions, to protect what was hers, and to act decisively when necessary. Eamon noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. Addie, he said, you're stronger than you realize. Today proved that, and tomorrow, we take another step forward. Adrielle smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Yes, she whispered, tomorrow, we reclaim everything they tried to steal from us, and we do it together. As night fell over Maplebridge, the house was quiet once more, but this time the silence was different. It was not oppressive, nor filled with fear. It was a silence that belonged to people who had survived, to people who had faced betrayal, and emerged with the clarity and determination to rebuild. And for the first time in months, Adrielle Rowan felt the faint glimmer of freedom. The following morning, Adrielle woke to the soft, golden light of Maplebridge filtering through the lace curtains. She stretched and felt the weight of the previous days pressing against her chest, a mixture of exhaustion, anger, and relief. The confrontation with Malcolm and Kyra had left an imprint on her soul. Even now, she could replay their faces in her mind, the way Malcolm's eyes darted nervously, the tremor in Kyra's lips as she tried to maintain composure. She rose slowly, walking toward the kitchen where Eamon was already preparing coffee. Morning, he said quietly, glancing up from the kettle. His gray hair caught the light, his eyes still carrying the same calm determination she had relied on over the past days. We have a lot to do today. Theodore sent over the initial legal paperwork. We need to ensure everything is secured before they try anything else. Adrielle nodded, though her stomach twisted at the thought of what lay ahead. She had spent months living in fear, slowly being manipulated into doubt and confusion by the very people she had trusted most. The evidence they now possessed was overwhelming, yet the emotional toll remained. I thought the hardest part was finding out the truth, she murmured, but facing them, it's even harder. Eamon placed a reassuring hand over hers. Yes, but it's necessary. They cannot be allowed to continue unchecked. This is not just about protecting what is ours, it's about ensuring they cannot harm anyone else in the future. Theodore arrived mid-morning, carrying a thick folder filled with legal documents, letters, and evidence. He laid everything on the table with precise care. We need to move quickly, he said. Malcolm and Kyra will attempt to regain control. They will try to manipulate, charm, and intimidate. We must act decisively and systematically. He glanced at Adrielle. Do you feel ready to proceed? Adrielle's gaze met Eamon's before she nodded. I feel ready. It's frightening, but we cannot wait any longer. Every day we delay gives them more power. She ran a hand over her forehead, feeling both the tension of the past months and the resolve forming within her. We have to be smart. We have to be relentless. Theodore began outlining the plan. First, all financial accounts in Adrielle's name would be secured, with immediate notification to banks regarding the fraudulent credit cards and transfers. Next, they would initiate proceedings to have Malcolm and Kyra legally restrained from accessing any of their assets. Every document, every audio recording, and every photograph would be submitted as part of the evidence. Adrielle listened carefully, absorbing each detail. The meticulous nature of the plan reassured her. This was a battle, yes, but one she now had the tools to win. Hours passed in a flurry of activity. Letters were drafted, signatures obtained, accounts secured, and notices delivered. Adrielle's mind moved like a machine, calculating, evaluating, anticipating every potential move Malcolm and Kyra might make. She realized that months of fear and manipulation had honed her instincts. She could spot deceit in the smallest gesture, anticipate lies before they were spoken. Each step of the process made her feel stronger, more in control, more determined to reclaim the life that had nearly been stolen from her. During a brief pause, Adrielle and Eamon walked through the house together. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. She paused by the living room window, looking out at the quiet street, imagining what Malcolm and Kyra might be plotting now. "Do you think they understand how serious this is?" she asked softly. Eamon shook his head. "No. They've always believed they could manipulate us with fear. They think they are clever, but we have something they underestimated. Truth and preparation, and most importantly, we have each other." His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "That is more powerful than any scheme they could devise." By late afternoon, they were ready for the next phase, a controlled meeting with legal representatives to confront Malcolm and Kyra formally. Theodore had arranged for the location to be neutral, yet secure, ensuring there would be no interruptions and no opportunities for manipulation. Adrielle felt her heart hammering as they arrived. The building was quiet, almost sterile, yet each step she took toward the meeting room felt like a reclaiming of agency. Malcolm and Kyra were already there, their expressions carefully neutral, though their unease was evident. Malcolm's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the room as though looking for an escape, while Kyra's hands twisted nervously in her lap. They had arrived expecting confrontation, but they had not anticipated the preparation, the documentation, the undeniable evidence amassed against them. Theodore began the session, methodically presenting the facts. Every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every attempt at gaslighting was laid out with precision. Adrielle watched Malcolm's expression shift, first to disbelief, then to anger, and finally to a dawning recognition of defeat. Kyra's mask of calm fractured, her lips pressed together, her eyes darting nervously. Malcolm attempted to interrupt, his voice rising, desperation creeping in. "This is unfair. You can't just Eamons.com. Authoritative voice stopped him. "I heard your words, Malcolm, every one of them, and the evidence proves your intentions. Denial will no longer work." Adrielle felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. The son she had raised, the boy she had nurtured, had become unrecognizable. But she also understood that the confrontation was necessary. It was not just about punishment, it was about exposure. About reclaiming her life from those who had sought to destroy it. Kyra's voice trembled as she tried to speak. "We didn't intend for it to go this far." Adrielle's response was firm, measured, yet filled with a quiet fury. "It went this far because you allowed it. Every action, every deception, every plan you set in motion brought you here. You are responsible." Malcolm sagged, his anger giving way to the realization that the truth could not be denied. The arrogance that had sustained him, the belief that he could manipulate reality to his will, collapsed under the weight of evidence and conviction. Kyra's tears were not of remorse, but of fear of consequences, fear of exposure, fear of the life they had tried to steal. Once the meeting concluded, Adrielle and Eamon returned home. The drive was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The confrontation had been emotionally draining, yet also liberating. Adrielle felt a strange clarity emerging. The threat was real, but contained. The evidence was irrefutable, and they had regained control of the narrative. Back home, Adrielle wandered through the rooms, noticing familiar details with new appreciation. The house, once a backdrop to manipulation and deceit, now felt like a sanctuary reclaimed. Each piece of furniture, every photograph, every window that let in the fading sunlight became a marker of resilience. She understood now that survival was not passive, it was active, deliberate, and courageous. That evening, As they prepared a simple meal together, Adrielle reflected on the day's events. She realized that while the confrontation with Malcolm and Kyra was over, the emotional and legal work had only just begun. Yet she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced betrayal, deception, and the darkest aspects of human ambition, and she had survived. More than that, she had learned to trust herself again, to recognize danger, and to act decisively when necessary. Eamon noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. "Addie," he said softly, "you've changed. You are stronger, clearer, and more resilient. Today proved that, and tomorrow, we continue to reclaim our lives, step by step." Adrielle nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "Yes," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we rebuild. Tomorrow, we ensure that nothing they did can ever harm us again. And we do it together." As night fell over Maplebridge, the house settled into a deep, quiet calm. The storm of betrayal had been exposed, the danger neutralized, and yet the path ahead was still long. Adrielle Rowan, once a woman quietly enduring manipulation and fear, now stood at the threshold of a reclaimed life. With Eamon by her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges remained, knowing that truth, courage, and preparation were now firmly in her hands. The morning sun filtered gently through the Maplebridge windows, casting warm light across the living room where Adrielle and Eamon were seated with Theodore Vale, reviewing the next phase of their plan. After the confrontation with Malcolm and Kyra, the legal groundwork had been laid. But the real challenge was only beginning, ensuring that justice would take hold, and that their lives could finally be reclaimed. Theodore leaned over the table, organizing papers with a meticulous precision that mirrored his calm mind. "The courts will move slowly," he said, "but the evidence we have is airtight. We need to prepare for their resistance, for manipulation, and for delays. You must remain vigilant and decisive." Adrielle ran her fingers over the thick folder of documents, photographs, and recordings. Every page was a reminder of the betrayal she had endured, yet also a testament to the resilience she had found within herself. She felt a mixture of anger, sorrow, and determination. "It's overwhelming," she admitted softly. "To think that the people closest to us could orchestrate something so calculated, so cruel. It's hard to believe it's real." Eamon reached across the table and took her hand, offering steady reassurance. "It is real, Addie, but so is our strength. This is not the time to dwell on what was lost. It's time to act strategically. Every document, every recording, every piece of proof is a tool in our hands. Malcolm and Kyra will learn, finally, that they cannot manipulate or intimidate us." His eyes met hers, resolute and unwavering. Anchoring her storming thoughts, they began by preparing affidavits and witness statements. Theodore instructed them carefully, emphasizing the need for clarity and precision. Every detail of the fraud, every attempt to manipulate Adrielle's perception of reality, every forged signature and false medical note had to be meticulously documented. Hours passed in a blur of pen strokes, typing, and careful review. Adrielle felt the weight of the past months pressing upon her. Yet there was also a strange satisfaction in taking control of the narrative that had been stolen from her. By late afternoon, they prepared for another crucial step, securing the assets that Malcolm and Kyra had attempted to claim through deception. Adrielle felt a tight knot of anxiety in her stomach, but Eamon's calm presence beside her offered reassurance. They worked with the bank, freezing accounts and reversing fraudulent transactions. Every phone call, every signature, every verification reinforced a sense of empowerment she had not experienced in years. For the first time, she realized that the life she had feared losing could indeed be reclaimed. Even as they worked, Adrielle could not ignore the emotional turbulence within her. She remembered Malcolm's angry eyes, Kyra's trembling hands, and the nights when she had questioned her own sanity. The psychological manipulation had been subtle yet insidious, leaving scars that went beyond the financial damage. "I can't believe how they tried to make me doubt myself," she whispered to Eamon as they took a brief pause. "The way they hid things, moved things, made me think I was losing my mind. It was calculated, cruel." Eamon squeezed her hand. "It was cruel, but you see it now. You see the truth. That is the difference between fear and power. And you have power now, Addie. Every step you take is reclaiming it." As evening approached, they reviewed the recordings again. Malcolm's voice, previously so confident and arrogant, now carried a desperation that was almost palpable. Kyra's attempts at charm and deflection sounded hollow, revealing the extent of their deceit. Adrielle felt a mix of sorrow and vindication. Sorrow for the son she had loved, vindication for seeing the truth laid bare. Each playback reinforced her resolve. She could not allow them to harm anyone else, nor could she allow herself to be silenced by fear or guilt. The next few days were filled with legal meetings, documentation, and careful strategizing. Adrielle's sense of empowerment grew with each completed task. She felt herself transforming, step by step, from a woman trapped in manipulation to one capable of facing the world with clarity and courage. She observed the patterns of deceit Malcolm and Kyra had created and recognized the subtle ways they tried to control others. Knowledge, she realized, was her most powerful weapon. One afternoon, as they prepared for a court appearance, Adrielle paused and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had once believed that family was an unbreakable bond, a source of comfort and safety, but now she understood that love, when entwined with ambition and greed, could become a weapon. She had endured months of subtle attacks on her sanity, deception, and theft, yet she had survived. More than that, she had emerged with clarity, strength, and a renewed sense of purpose. Eamon noticed the quiet determination in her gaze. "Addie," he said gently, "you've changed. You're no longer the woman who doubted herself. You're resilient, aware, and decisive. Malcolm and Kyra's actions cannot undo that." Adrielle nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "Yes," she said softly, "they tried to take everything from me, but they underestimated the power of truth and preparation. I will not allow them to define my life anymore." The day of the preliminary court hearing arrived. Adrielle and Eamon were accompanied by Theodore, who guided them through the process with expertise and calm authority. Malcolm and Kyra entered the courtroom together, faces masked in feigned confidence, yet betraying subtle signs of fear. Adrielle's pulse quickened, but she reminded herself to remain composed. She had prepared for this moment meticulously, and she would not allow emotion to cloud her judgment. The hearing began with Theodore presenting the evidence, each document, photograph, and recording carefully explained. The judge listened intently, taking notes as the facts of Malcolm and Kyra's scheme unfolded. Adrielle felt a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. The truth she had fought to uncover was finally being heard, validated by the authority of the law. Malcolm attempted to interject, his voice rising with frustration, but the judge silenced him firmly. Kyra's attempts to explain or justify their actions were met with equal skepticism. The courtroom, once a place of intimidation, became a space of clarity and accountability. Adrielle felt a profound sense of relief as she realized that their power over her had been neutralized. For the first time in months, she could breathe freely, knowing that justice was on her side. After the hearing, Adrielle and Eamon returned home. The drive was quiet, the streets of Maplebridge bathed in the soft light of late afternoon. Adrielle reflected on the journey so far. The betrayal, the manipulation, the legal battles, all of it had been overwhelming. Yet it had also forged a strength within her she had never known existed. She understood now that survival required not only endurance but also strategy, courage, and clarity of purpose. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Adrielle felt a renewed sense of hope. She and Eamon discussed plans for the future, how they would safeguard their assets, rebuild their lives, and ensure that Malcolm and Kyra could not interfere again. Each conversation, each decision, reinforced their shared resolve and deepened their bond. The trauma of the past months had not weakened them, it had strengthened them. As night fell, Adrielle sat by the window, looking out at the quiet streets of Maplebridge. The moon cast a silver glow over the rooftops, and she felt a sense of calm she had not experienced in a long time. She knew that challenges remained, legal proceedings were ongoing, and emotional scars would take time to heal. But for the first time, she felt a true sense of agency. She was no longer a passive participant in the lives of others. She had reclaimed her voice, her power, and her future. Eamon joined her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're ready for whatever comes next," he said softly. "Together, we can face anything." Adrielle smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion, determination, and hope. "Yes," she whispered, "together, we are unstoppable." And as they stood side by side, looking out at the world that had once seemed so uncertain, Adrielle felt the quiet, undeniable strength that comes from surviving betrayal, embracing truth, and reclaiming one's life from the shadows of deception. The morning air in Maplebridge was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from the nearby hills. Adrielle awoke with a sense of cautious anticipation. The previous days had been grueling, yet she felt a measure of clarity she hadn't known for months. The confrontation with Malcolm and Kyra, along with the preliminary court hearing, had set the stage for justice, but the path ahead was still uncertain. Today, Theodore had arranged meetings with additional legal advisors and representatives from the banks to ensure that every precaution was taken to protect their assets. Eamon was already at the kitchen table, reviewing documents with precise attention. His demeanor was calm yet purposeful, a steady anchor in a world that had been chaotic for too long. "Good morning," he said softly, glancing up. "We have a full day ahead. The banks, the legal filings, and potentially further communication from Malcolm or Kyra. Are you ready?" Adrielle nodded, sipping her coffee, feeling a strange mix of determination and fatigue. "I think so," she said. "It's exhausting, but we've come too far to turn back now. We have to see this through." Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay a coil of emotions, anger, betrayal, and the faint spark of vindication. Their first stop was the bank, where Theodore guided them through the final steps to freeze accounts, cancel fraudulent credit cards, and ensure that no additional funds could be Adrielle listened intently, asking questions and clarifying details. Aware that even a small oversight could give Malcolm and Kyra an opening, she felt a surge of empowerment as she realized she was no longer helpless. She was an active participant in safeguarding her life and finances. After leaving the bank, they went to the law offices to finalize filings that would formally restrict Malcolm and Kyra's access to any property or assets. The process was meticulous, involving signatures, notarizations, and multiple verifications. Adrielle felt a strange satisfaction with each completed step, a tangible proof that the months of manipulation and deceit would no longer control her life. During a brief break, Adrielle and Eamon walked along a quiet street near the river. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun, reflecting light across the calm surface. Adrielle paused, staring at the rippling currents. "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything," she said quietly. "Our home, our security, even our peace of mind. I never imagined that my own son would betray me like that." Eamon squeezed her hand. "It's a bitter truth," he said, "but the important thing is that we saw it for what it was and acted decisively. That's what matters now. We are in control. We decide our future." They returned home and spent the evening reviewing additional recordings and documentation, ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly organized and protected. Each file, each recording, was a testament to Malcolm and Kyra's deception, but also a measure of Adrielle and Eamon's resilience. With Theodore's guidance, they prepared for the next court appearance, where the evidence would be submitted formally, and the legal consequences for Malcolm and Kyra would become unavoidable. Days later, the formal hearings began. Adrielle and Eamon sat quietly in the courtroom, listening as the evidence was reviewed. Malcolm and Kyra appeared pale and defensive, attempting to justify their actions. But the documentation presented by Theodore was irrefutable. Every transaction, every forged signature, every falsified medical note was laid bare. Adrielle observed the flicker of shame in Malcolm's eyes and the tight, nervous movements of Kyra's hands. Their attempts at denial or manipulation were rendered powerless by the weight of evidence. The judge, a stern but fair woman with decades of experience, listened intently. She asked questions about the documentation, the authenticity of the recordings, and the motivations behind the fraudulent activities. Adrielle answered with clarity, recounting her experiences, the attempts to gaslight her, and the discovery of their financial schemes. Each word she spoke felt like a reclamation of power, a step toward freedom and closure. After several hours, the judge recessed, instructing both parties to reconvene in the following weeks for further proceedings. Theodore advised Adrielle and Eamon to continue securing their assets and documenting any new attempts at interference. The couple left the courtroom, exhausted yet buoyed by the realization that the law was on their side. Back at home, Adrielle walked through each room with a renewed sense of ownership. The house, once a place of fear and manipulation, now felt like a sanctuary. She ran her hand along familiar surfaces, noticing the textures, the sunlight through the windows, and the way the air felt calm and safe. Eamon joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's ours again," he said softly. "Every corner, every detail, we've reclaimed it." Adrielle smiled faintly. "Yes," she replied. "It feels right. After everything, I thought I might never feel this way again. But now, it's ours. We survived. We're free." In the weeks that followed, Adrielle and Eamon continued to solidify their security. Banks confirmed the cancellation of fraudulent accounts, and legal filings ensured that Malcolm and Kyra could not access any remaining assets. Theodore remained a constant presence, guiding them through each step and providing reassurance when the weight of the process felt overwhelming. Adrielle realized that while the betrayal had left deep scars, the meticulous steps they were taking were slowly knitting a sense of control and safety back into her life. One quiet evening, as Adrielle and Eamon sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the distant hills. She reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "I never thought I'd see this moment," she said softly. The fear, the betrayal, it felt insurmountable. But now, seeing it all laid bare, I feel something I haven't felt in months: peace. Eamon nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's the peace that comes from facing the truth and taking action. We cannot change what happened, but we can shape what comes next. And we will." Adrielle leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his presence. She realized that the journey was far from over, but she no longer felt powerless. The steps they were taking, the decisions they were making, and the clarity they had gained were creating a foundation for a life free from fear, deceit, and manipulation. That night, as they prepared for bed, Adrielle felt a sense of resolve. The legal process would continue, the consequences for Malcolm and Kyra would unfold, and the emotional scars would take time to heal. But she was no longer a passive participant in her life. She had reclaimed her voice, her power, and her future. And with Eamon by her side, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, unshakable and unwavering. As the house settled into the quiet of night, Adrielle Rowan felt something she had not felt in years: the quiet strength of survival, the clarity of truth, and the hope of a life rebuilt from the shadows of betrayal. She closed her eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to reclaim the joy, freedom, and peace that had once seemed so distant. The first light of dawn spilled over Maple Bridge, illuminating the quiet streets and the familiar facade of Adrielle and Eamon's home. The air was crisp and filled with the faint scent of autumn leaves, a gentle reminder that life, though complex and sometimes cruel, moved forward with or without permission. Adrielle awoke feeling a mixture of anticipation and quiet trepidation. Today marked a significant turning point, the formal judgment for Malcolm and Kyra's fraudulent actions. Months of anxiety, investigation, and meticulous planning had led to this moment. Eamon was already awake, reviewing court documents at the kitchen table. His demeanor remained composed, though Adrielle could see the subtle tightness around his eyes, an expression she recognized as vigilance. "Morning," he said quietly, glancing up. "Are you ready for today?" Adrielle nodded, though a tight knot of anxiety coiled in her stomach. "As ready as I can be. It's still overwhelming, knowing we'll finally hear the consequences they must face." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But it's also empowering. We've done everything we could to ensure justice is clear and undeniable." The drive to the courthouse was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Adrielle stared out the window at the familiar streets, noticing the subtle ways sunlight played across the rooftops. It struck her that life had continued around them, indifferent to their pain and struggles. Yet she felt ready to step back into it, not as a victim, but as someone who had reclaimed control. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Malcolm and Kyra arrived separately, their faces carefully composed, but Adrielle could sense the tension beneath the surface. Their eyes met hers for brief, fleeting moments, revealing flickers of panic and unease. She held her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing fear in her eyes. This time, she was not the passive target of manipulation. She was prepared, armed with evidence and resolve. The proceedings began, with Theodore presenting the meticulously gathered documentation. Each fraudulent transaction, every falsified signature, every instance of medical deception was laid out with clarity and precision. Adrielle watched Malcolm's expression shift from feigned confidence to anger, and finally to resignation. Kyra's hands trembled slightly in her lap, her attempts to maintain composure unraveling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. As the judge reviewed the evidence and listened to testimonies, Adrielle felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. She thought of the months she had spent doubting herself, feeling manipulated, and fearing the loss of her home and savings. Now, she understood the full extent of Malcolm and Kyra's deceit, yet she also recognized the depth of her own resilience. Every recorded conversation, every document, every careful observation had been a testament to her perseverance and clarity. The judge finally spoke, her voice firm but fair. "The evidence presented demonstrates a deliberate and systematic attempt to defraud, manipulate, and mislead. The court finds Malcolm Rowan guilty of financial fraud and manipulation. He is hereby sentenced to 18 months of probation, restitution payments, and mandatory counseling for behavioral issues identified during the investigation. Kyra Rowan is found guilty of professional misconduct related to falsifying medical documents and engaging in fraudulent activity. She will lose her professional license and is subject to financial restitution." Adrielle felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that justice had been served, sorrow for the familial betrayal, and a quiet sense of closure. Malcolm lowered his gaze, his arrogance shattered by the undeniable reality of his actions. Kyra's lips pressed together tightly, tears threatening to spill, as the consequences of her deceit became unavoidable. The courtroom, once a place of tension and fear, now felt like a space of clarity and accountability. After the proceedings, Adrielle and Eamon returned home, the drive quiet yet filled with a sense of liberation. The weight of uncertainty and betrayal had been lifted, leaving room for something that had seemed impossible in recent months: hope. Adrielle walked through the house, noticing details she had once overlooked: the gentle creak of the stairs, the warmth of sunlight through the windows, the subtle scent of the garden outside. Each small detail was a reminder that life, reclaimed and protected, could feel safe and comforting again. In the following weeks, they took further steps to secure their life and rebuild what had been threatened. The house, once shadowed by fear and deceit, became a sanctuary. Adrielle found solace in gardening, tending to plants and flowers that symbolized growth and renewal. Eamon, ever supportive, joined her in small projects around the home, their partnership strengthening with each shared task. The trauma of betrayal lingered, but it was gradually replaced by empowerment, resilience, and a renewed sense of purpose. Adrielle also began taking steps to reconnect with her own interests and passions. Long neglected under the weight of manipulation and fear, she enrolled in local art classes, found a small community of like-minded individuals, and began exploring hobbies that brought her joy and fulfillment. Each new endeavor was a step toward reclaiming the self she had once been: a woman independent, thoughtful, and capable of navigating life on her own terms. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Adrielle, postmarked from an unfamiliar address. Her heart momentarily tightened, fearing it might be Malcolm attempting one last attempt at contact. She opened it cautiously, finding only a short note. Malcolm, now in therapy, admitted to his entitlement issues and acknowledged why Adrielle and Eamon had chosen to sever ties. He expressed a desire to understand his failings, though Adrielle, with calm resolve, chose not to respond. The act of reading the letter and setting it aside became a symbolic gesture. She had no obligation to engage with those who had caused harm. Months later, Adrielle and Eamon made a significant decision: to leave Maplebridge and start anew. They sold the large family home, using the proceeds to pay off any remaining debts and to purchase a smaller house in the quiet town of Redwood Springs. It was 3 hours away, far enough to establish distance, but close enough to remain connected to the familiar world they loved. The new home featured a modest garden, a cozy kitchen, and sunlight streaming through every room, a tangible representation of a life reclaimed and carefully protected. The process of moving was cathartic. Every packed box, every item carried into the new home symbolized a release from the past. Adrielle felt the physical and emotional burden lifting with each step. As they unpacked and arranged their belongings, she realized that the trauma they had endured had forged a bond with Eamon, stronger than any fear or betrayal could sever. They were no longer defined by the actions of others, they were defined by the choices they made, the resilience they cultivated, and the love and respect they nurtured for one another. In Redwood Springs, Adrielle and Eamon began to settle into a routine that was peaceful, intentional, and free from the shadows of manipulation. The community welcomed them warmly, and they began forming connections based on mutual respect and shared values. Adrielle found joy in the small moments, tending her garden, sharing meals with Eamon, walking through the quiet streets, and embracing the freedom to live without fear or deceit. As autumn turned to winter, Adrielle often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced betrayal from the closest of family, navigated complex legal battles, and endured months of manipulation designed to undermine her sense of self. Yet she had survived, emerged stronger, and reclaimed her life. She understood now that the greatest freedom came from walking away from those who caused harm, even when they were once loved, and embracing the unknown with courage and clarity. Sitting by the window one evening, watching the snow lightly dust the rooftops of Redwood Springs, Adrielle took Eamon's hand in hers. "We've come so far," she said softly, a quiet smile gracing her lips. "I never imagined life could feel this safe, this peaceful." Eamon nodded, his eyes reflecting the same quiet contentment. "It's only the beginning, Addie. We've reclaimed our lives, and now we have the chance to build something beautiful together." Adrielle leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his presence. For the first time in years, she felt an enduring sense of freedom, safety, and hope. The journey had been long, painful, and fraught with challenges, but the destination a life reclaimed from deceit and betrayal. was more precious than she could have ever imagined. And as the snow fell softly outside, Adrielle Rowan knew, with absolute certainty, that they had emerged from the shadows stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the life that lay ahead. Winter had settled fully over Redwood Springs, blanketing the small town in pristine white. The air was crisp and invigorating, carrying the subtle scent of pine and wood smoke from chimneys dotting the quiet streets. Adrielle woke early. Sunlight reflected off the snow, illuminating the room in soft, golden light. For the first time in years, she did not feel the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. The tumult of betrayal, legal battles, and deceit had been replaced by a calm clarity, a peace earned through struggle, vigilance, and resilience. Eamon was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee with the same quiet precision Adrielle had come to admire. His presence was steady, a constant reassurance that the past could not touch them here. He turned as she entered, offering a small smile. "Morning, Addie," he said softly. "Sleep well." Adrielle nodded, wrapping her hands around a mug of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "Yes," she said, "better than I have in months. It's peaceful here. I can't remember the last time I felt this calm." Eamon joined her at the table, their hands brushing naturally as they settled in. "That calm is well earned," he said. "You faced everything, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, and came through stronger. This peace isn't luck. It's the result of courage, determination, and reclaiming your life." Adrielle smiled faintly, thinking back to the months of fear and uncertainty she had endured. Malcolm and Kyra's betrayal had been profound, testing her trust, her resilience, and her sense of self. Yet in surviving it, she had discovered a strength she never knew existed. Every confrontation, every legal filing, every careful step had been a reclaiming of agency. And now, the freedom she had fought for was tangible. The day unfolded slowly, intentionally. Adrielle tended to the garden outside, brushing snow from tender plants and shrubs, a ritual both symbolic and grounding. Eamon assisted, clearing pathways and ensuring their new home remained safe and inviting. Each action felt purposeful, a tangible demonstration that the past would not dictate the future. Adrielle reflected on how small, deliberate choices had rebuilt a sense of security and joy. Later, they received a call from Theodore Vale, updating them on the final legal repercussions for Malcolm and Kyra. The probation and counseling mandated for Malcolm were underway, and Kyra's professional license had been permanently revoked. The legal system had recognized the extent of their fraud and manipulation, offering formal closure and protection. Adrielle felt a quiet satisfaction justice had been served, and the threat that had haunted their lives was neutralized. As the weeks passed, Adrielle and Eamon settled fully into Redwood Springs. They explored the town's winding streets, meeting neighbors and forging new friendships. Adrielle discovered a small library where she could study art and history, immersing herself in creative pursuits that had been neglected during years of fear and manipulation. Each day brought small joys, a neighbor waving as they walked past, sunlight catching the snow on the hills, the smell of fresh bread from the local bakery. Life, she realized, could be rich and fulfilling, even after hardship. One afternoon, Adrielle received a letter from an old friend, someone who had supported her emotionally throughout the ordeal. It was filled with warmth, encouragement, and congratulations on reclaiming her life. She felt a quiet thrill reading the words, a confirmation that the choices she had made, difficult, painful, and courageous, were justified. The letter reminded her that while betrayal and deceit had marked her past, they did not define her future. Evenings became a time of reflection and connection. Adrielle and Eamon would sit by the fireplace, sipping tea and recounting small victories from the day. They laughed, planned, and dreamed, their bond deepening with each shared moment. Adrielle realized that love, when nurtured with respect, honesty, and care, could be a source of profound strength and comfort, a stark contrast to the toxic relationships she had endured with Malcolm and Kyra. Months later, she found herself sitting in the garden, watching the first signs of spring emerge through the snow. Crocuses and early daffodils peeked through, delicate yet resilient, a reminder that life, like them, could flourish even after long winters. Adrielle inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs, and thought of everything she had survived, the manipulation, the theft, the betrayal, and the fear. She had endured it all, and emerged whole, stronger, and free. Eamon joined her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than survive," he said. "You've rebuilt, reclaimed, and found strength. This is your life now, Addie. Safe, free, and full of possibilities." Adrielle smiled, a quiet, contented expression. Yes, she whispered. And I understand something now. The greatest freedom isn't just escaping harm, it's having the courage to step into the unknown. Leaving behind even those you once loved when that love became indistinguishable from harm. We walked away from pain and deception. And now we've built something better. Eamon nodded, their fingers entwined. We've built it together, and that makes it unshakable. Weeks turned into months, and Adrielle's confidence and serenity grew. Redwood Springs became not just a place of refuge but a canvas for a life fully reclaimed. She immersed herself in hobbies, social activities, and the rhythm of ordinary life, savoring the security, peace, and independence she had fought so hard to achieve. Every decision, every day, reinforced the lesson she had learned. Survival required courage, and true freedom required the willingness to leave behind those who caused harm. One quiet evening, Adrielle stood by the window, watching the sunset over the rolling hills. Eamon joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. Together, they watched the golden light fade, the world bathed in the gentle hues of evening. The struggles of the past seemed distant now, memories of shadows they had left behind. What remained was clarity, love, and the quiet promise of a life reclaimed. Adrielle took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the home, the presence of Eamon, and the security they had carefully built together. We did it, she said softly, her voice filled with quiet triumph. We survived, we reclaimed our lives, and we're finally free. Eamon smiled, leaning closer. Yes, Addie. And now the rest is ours to create. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adrielle Rowan realized, with absolute certainty, that the life they had forged protected, reclaimed, and full of quiet joy was more precious than anything they had ever imagined. The shadows of the past no longer held power, and the future, wide and open, belonged to them. In Redwood Springs, amid the gentle embrace of snow-covered streets, gardens slowly awakening, and the warmth of a life rebuilt, Adrielle and Eamon embraced a new beginning, a life defined by freedom, resilience, love, and the courage to step boldly into the unknown.